Welcome to Crosspoint.
Welcome to Crosspoint.
Welcome to Crosspoint.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
I'm part of the Anglican Church of Southern Africa. So in the US it would be called the Episcopal Church. For me, the Eucharist is an act of memory making. It does two things. One, it invites me to remember, and the other is it's a protest. I won't forget. I won't forget who I belong to. I won't forget that I'm called to say yes to brokenness. I won't forget that my blood too must be poured out for others. And the memory is that I don't do this on my own, I do this with others. I belong to a body, I belong to Jesus, I belong to the body of Christ around the world. It's a remembering, a reassociating, and then to connect that story to, I guess, the story of the empire. The Roman Empire did its worst. It crushed human bodies. It broke the body of Jesus. It caused the blood of Jesus to flow. And that's not the end of the story. And so it connects me to hope. Because in the middle of the Eucharist is the reminder of resurrection. We do this because this is not the end of the story. We do this because this invites us to a deeper story. And so that's that Eucharistic thing that we do.
Teach me that it all belongs, that everything is sacred. I eat the bread and drink the wine, but help me love my neighbor and show me how to hold this life, 'cause I don't want upside down. Oh, it can be here and now. Oh, I'm seeing it all around, that everything is sacred. The ordinary shines and glows, filled with your intentions. You don't see the lines we draw between secular and sacred. So show me how to hold this life, 'cause I don't want to waste it. No, I don't want to waste it. Heaven is upside down. Oh, it can be here and now. Oh, I'm seeing it all around, that everything is sacred. Life is a gift and the giver is good. Life is a gift and the giver is good. Life is a gift and the giver is good. Life is a gift and the giver is good. Life is a gift and the giver is good. Life is a gift and the giver is good. that everything is sacred.
The empty filled, the wounded healed, the broken back together. The poor are blessed, the weary rest. We will dance forever. The blinded see, the chained are free, the doubtful now believer, the outcast known, the orphan home. You are my Redeemer. Behold, behold, behold what love can do. Behold, behold, He's making all things new. Return, the voiceless heard, the mourner now rejoicing. The mountains shake, the world awake, creation all composing. The sad untrue, the earth renewed, the song has found its singer. The darkness light, the dead alive. You are my Redeemer. Behold, behold, behold what love can do. Behold, behold, He's making all things new. Behold, behold, behold what love can do. Behold, behold, He's making all things new. You are 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 making all things new. Behold, behold, behold what love can do. Behold, behold, He's making all things new.
Hi friends, good to be with you today. I have a couple things to make you aware of. One, if you were a college-aged young adult, if that describes you or it describes somebody that you know, I wanted to make sure to remind you that there are several opportunities to connect with others that would describe themselves the same way this summer. And the way to be brought up to speed on that, you can go to CrossPoint's Young Adult Instagram page. It's CrossPoint Cary YA, and you'll not only see advertisements for different events that are happening, but you'll also see that there's a group me that you can join, and then that's how you can stay informed, up to date, all that stuff. So if you haven't, I hope that you will. And now to describe people way younger than that, our Kids Point kids, so the whole family, the parents. I wanted to make sure that you knew that next Sunday, July 30th, right after service at 11:30, but on the far side of our campus, down at the YMCA, we're going to be having a pool party, a Sunday fun day. So your job is to show up with swimwear and lunch, and then we're going to provide not only the popsicles, but the pool. So it should be a lot of fun. Hope that you can make it next Sunday right after service on the 30th. Also, August 1st is our final story night of the year. If you haven't been to a story night, this is a chance for you to address that. It's a lot of fun. If you don't know what it is, story night is half a dozen storytellers telling live, true, personal stories, and they're all based on a theme. And the theme this time is nature. So there'll be stories of the great, or depending on who you are, the not so great outdoors. Stories of animals and camping and weather and all kinds of stuff. Some veterans are coming back to tell some stories, and then there's some newbies that I'm really excited about. It's going to be a blast. It's always a blast. We hold this event in Cary at the Fortnight Brewing Company. Yeah, they're a company. Fortnight Brewing. And that's one of the reasons that it's really helpful, even though it's a free event. It's always a free event, but registering helps us and Fortnight prepare for you to be there. So go to crosspoint.org/events, and then you can sign up for whoever's coming, register for it under Story Night on that page. Hope that you'll do that. Hope to see you there. And then, as always, there's a lot of cool things that we get to be and do together every day of the week. And there's a lot of ways that we work together. Not least of those ways are how we come together to financially support Crosspoint. So if that's right for your family and for you, I hope that you'd go to crosspoint.org/contribute and look at the different ways that you can get involved sustaining what we get to do together. Or you can, right from your phone, you can text Crosspoint NC to 77977 and get set up that way from your phone. As always, it's great to get to do and be all these things together with you, and I hope that you have a great day.
Hi, Crosspoint. I want to invite you to think about some important dates or memories in your life, like anniversaries, birthdays, markers, anything that has had an impact on you, positive or negative, difficult or joyful. If you are not watching this on your phone, go ahead and pull out your phone, look up your Google Photos or iPhotos or whatever it is you store your photos these days, and find a real, true, honest image. You could randomly scroll to a picture several years ago if you can. Better yet, if you can find the month of July several years ago, go ahead and do that. If you can't do that right now, take a look at a picture on your wall or in a photo album, or take a look at your calendar from this date several years ago. What is there? If you're feeling brave, maybe you share one of these images with a friend. Here's a few of mine. Whew. Have you changed much since then? Who have you become since that photo or that date? What have you learned? Have new things become important? Does what seemed so important back then now seem trivial, or vice versa? The passage I chose to walk through today is one of the readings from the lectionary today. And if you grew up in a liturgical tradition, you know that means that everyone else who uses the liturgy is probably reading and contemplating the exact same passages this week. In fact, our youngest Crosspoint attendees are also talking about this story today, and they're doing a lot of fun things like digging in the dirt and looking for rocks. And I apologize that I didn't prepare anything like that for you today, but if that's something that you like, then maybe you should volunteer in Treehouse. So the liturgical calendar is on a 3-year cycle, meaning that by the end of the 3rd year, you have read through the entire Bible. Every 3 years, you get the chance to revisit the same ancient texts that have, outside of translation, remain pretty much the same. The texts are the same, but hopefully in the 3 years that have passed, we have not. Hopefully in those years, we've grown and changed and shifted positively as individuals, as a community, and by the time we get back to this passage, we should see and hear and understand things differently than we did 3 years ago. Maybe it's just because different things are happening in our lives. So where were you 3 years ago? Just for some perspective, 3 years ago was July 2020, after we were just beginning to understand words like quarantine and lockdown. It's a different time, wasn't it? As a non-denominational church, Crosspoint doesn't typically use the liturgy, but I wanted to draw from this week, first, to be reminded that there's others around the globe contemplating how to love in the way of Christ. And second, to be reminded to remember. Because when we pause to remember, we can better chart our way forward. So this word remember, today it's from the Old Testament, and the Hebrew word actually means to be mindful of. To be mindful of someone or a memory or a place. In Hebrew, you can actually remember the future because you're able to be mindful of it. In Hebrew, remembering is deliberately being mindful of, and forgetting is deliberately refusing to be mindful. So remembering isn't just about being mindful of our own experiences in past, but also being mindful of others' past experiences who are in our community. It's being mindful of them so that we can be mindful of our shared future. And the passage today involves remembering and marking our lives. It's an ancient story. It's a snapshot from the life of a man named Jacob, who was the grandson of Abraham, considered the patriarch of Judaism, the first in the line of the Israelites. And his family was kind of a big deal. And this narrative is taken from the very first book of the Hebrew Bible, the book which we call Genesis, which actually means origin or beginning or formation. This text is thousands of years old, which means we have to approach it understanding that we can't truly understand what this Jacob, who we're going to talk about, what his life must have been like. Historians can only guess at the exact time in which Jacob lived, but Jewish rabbinic tradition suggests that it's somewhere in the 1800s BCE. And to those of us whom that date means very little out of context, this is actually considered the Bronze Age. Bronze literally didn't exist until this time period. Farming was just beginning. Urbanization was just happening. So there's very few comparisons between our world and our lives today and what was happening at that time. But we still have this ancient story that we can wrestle with. And it's found in Genesis chapter 28, starting in verse 11. He, meaning Jacob, came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a stairway set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. And your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I'm with you and will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. And then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't know it. and he was afraid. And he said, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head, and he put it up for a pillar and poured oil on top of it. And he called that place Bethel, or Bethel. But the name of the city was Luz at first. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and keep me in this way, that I will go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I can come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone, which I have set up for a pillar, shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will surely give 1/10 to you." So it's important to note really quickly that relationships between gods and humans were considered transactional, and sometimes we haven't really gotten over this. But it was basically, you do this for me, and I will do that for you, which was a very primitive understanding of the divine. And what we've come to understand later through the teachings of the prophets and Jesus and even Paul's later writings is the amazing thing about the love of God, about the love of this particular God, is that their love was not transactional. This is what made this God so different than all the others. There was and is nothing required to be loved and approved of. So before we talk any more about this event in Jacob's life, we need to establish his character. He was a crook. He was sneaky. He was tricky. He was known for more for his strategery and survival instinct than for his honesty and integrity. And the writer wanted us to know this, and they wanted to know that this was his defining characteristic from the start of his life. Because they tell us before he was born, he was already trying to get ahead. And the story goes that he grabbed the heel of his older brother, his twin, Esau, to pull him back into his mother's womb so that Jacob might be born first. So that didn't work out, and Jacob was born the younger twin, which according to tradition at that time, he was always destined for the crumbs and the seconds. And he was not okay with this. And he took it upon himself to strategically steal the birthright and the blessing from his older brother, Esau. Later on, he also tricked his future father-in-law out of most of his livestock and then out of a lot of his belongings. These are just a few of the many things we could say about Jacob. And one could probably chalk up his character flaws to nature and to nurture, because having Abraham as his famous grandfather, the patriarch on which his people's heritage and legacy hinged, it was a legacy that as second-born he was never really expected to live up to, but he so desperately wanted to have to. So he took what he thought he was owed. And on more than one occasion, that life philosophy sent him running for his life, which is where we find him here. And on this particular night, his father had sent him packing to find a wife considered suitable. And after miles of staying one step ahead of his brother, who wanted him dead for stealing from him and ruining his life, Jacob decided it was time to rest. Now, by all accounts, Jacob should not have been someone capable or gifted with a good night's sleep, because most of us who had done what he had already done would have been kept up all night, racked with guilt over our actions. Or at the very least, we would have been worried that we would be killed in our sleep by our vengeful brother. But not Jacob. He picked up his pillow rock and he slept like a baby. One would also think that if things were fair and right in the world, a man like Jacob should not have his faulty character rewarded with a visit from the divine. But as we so often are, God surprises us with reminders that their love for us has nothing to do with us at all. And so Jacob was gifted with a dream of a ladder that bridged heaven and earth. And if things weren't interesting enough, the ladder had heavenly messengers going up and down it. And some of these, even our own translation, describe these as angels, but really the descriptions here don't match other descriptions of angels. So a better translation is probably calling them heavenly messengers. But the dream didn't stop even there. God, the God who came and made promises to Jacob's grandfather, also appeared to Jacob. And it's interesting that although Jacob saw a ladder in his dreams that went all the way up to heaven, he wasn't asked to ascend it. Instead, the divine appeared beside him, and Jacob's sight line had to shift from the heavens down to the earth. Instead of Jacob ascending, God came into Jacob's space. Much like what would happen centuries later when God is said to have stepped out of the heavens and descended to earth in the form of a tiny baby, as Emmanuel, God with us. A baby who would grow up to be Jesus the Christ, God come down to earth. God concerned and engaged with humanity. And we mark that event every year too, at Advent and Christmas. And it seems that there is much more in our scriptures about the divine coming down rather than humanity going up. And perhaps that means that's where most of our focus really should be. So, as God was beside Jacob, they informed him that he was the linchpin for lots and lots and lots and lots of people's well-being. Suddenly, this self-centered man who had tricked and clawed his way to where he was, who was currently not considered much more than an exile, a fugitive, and someone's important grandson, is told that what he did mattered, that who he was mattered, outside of his heritage mattered. Suddenly, Jacob could no longer be the center of his own universe. His personal, narrow interests could no longer be the central point. Would he act selfishly in the future? Yes. Would he continue to be tricky? Yes. But after his divine vision, Jacob did something common for that time. He marked the place where this important event had happened. He took his rock pillow, he put some oil on it, he gave the site a name, Bethel or Bethel. And from that point on, whenever he came back to that place, he would be reminded of the moment that he was commissioned to be something else. And whenever anyone else passed by that place, they would be prompted to ask, "Tell me what happened here." This marking of important things, buildings or altars or placing stones, occurs often in the Hebrew Bible. And even throughout the world history, we find cairns in Gaelic and Icelandic culture. Why? Perhaps it's because often to understand our present, we must first understand our past, and marking that helps. Sometimes we mark the good events, anniversaries, birthdays, we save ticket stubs and wedding announcements and terrible t-shirts that no longer fit from that concert over a decade ago. Social media has marketed this really well to us, haven't they? They've given us timelines, so we never forget what we posted or where we were 12 years ago after that dinner we had with that one place with those particular people that we haven't thought about since. That's gonna show up. Think about it for a moment. What images or dates did you go back to a few moments ago? How did they make you feel? Did you find yourself saying, "How young I looked," or "OMG, that hair, what was I thinking?" or "Wow, I thought I knew so much back then"? If you didn't go back to a specific date that you don't normally mark, what events are markers in your life? Maybe there are certain places you go or events you attend in honor or memory of someone. We also practice corporate remembrance. Things like the 4th of July that we just had, or Juneteenth, or the New Year. If you are of Hispanic heritage, maybe you recognize the Day of the Dead. If you're Muslim, maybe the tradition of the Hajj or pilgrimage to the Kaaba in Mecca, which is believed to be the house of God and marks the directions for Muslims around the globe to pray. Tradition actually says it had to be rebuilt several times, once by Jacob's grandfather Abraham to mark where he left his wife Hagar and their son Ishmael in the desert. The Hindu Color Festival has been recognized each spring since the 4th century, and it marks good triumphing over evil. You could mention Carnival and moon festivals and Pride Month and History Months. There are annual Comic-Cons and Oktoberfests when we meet to remember beer, or people who say every Tuesday is Taco Tuesday. I suppose on some level these are all a level of remembrance, most likely marketing or both. But the point is, humans like to mark things, perhaps that so that we can remind ourselves that we're capable of transcending the ordinary, perhaps for the assurance that we won't be forgotten. We tend to be pretty good at wanting to remember things we think are worth celebrating. But we're also charged with remembering the difficult too. We have cultural phrases like, remember the Alamo, and things like bumper stickers that say never forget. Collectively, we do this through things like Memorial Day or D-Day or the 9/11 Day of Service. In the 1800s, in England, there was actually a practice of photographing the dead, and they were called memento mori, meaning remember you will die. Real positive. So they pulled these photographs out to remember the people they had lost, but also to remember, to be mindful of their own mortality, that they had the same inevitable future ahead of them. Now, individually, these difficult things are often things we wish we could forget, but we can't. Those painful things in our lives that changed things forever. We will never forget them as much as we may want to, but they changed things and they changed us, and we can't help but remember. Sometimes we need to remember them so we can put them in their place and move on. Sometimes we need to remember them so that we're reminded not to repeat the past. And that doesn't mean we have to wallow in the painful or dwell in the despair. And many of us have spent a lot of money and tears on therapists and hours with wine or coffee and friends who have helped us put these experiences in the proper places in our minds and in our hearts and in our spirits. And most of the time, it means we don't forget painful memories, just that when we recognize them, they no longer keep such a hold on us. Now, one might think it would be beneficial to erase every traumatic or difficult event in our lives. And there have been plenty of dystopian and science fiction novels written around the idea of what would happen if we could erase bad memories. In 2011, scientists actually did a study on snails to see if trauma could be erased. I'm not really sure what trauma snails experience, but whatever, they figured it out. So they found that, at least on a small scale, erasure, or at least reframing of the trauma, might actually be possible. But they found that even if trauma could be completely erased, there was a problem with something called the law of unintended consequences, meaning memories, good and difficult, are often intricately linked. And to erase trauma has the collateral damage of erasing some part of what made a person, or a snail, who they are or who they might become. Instead, doctors and psychologists suggest not taking away a memory of an event, but taking away the fear that it brings. I want to pause for a minute, because I'm certainly not suggesting that those who have experienced extreme trauma or who suffer from PTSD deserved what they experienced, nor that they should just get over it or be grateful for it, nor that they should just joyfully hang onto their experiences and continually relive the trauma of them. Nor am I suggesting that if you are currently in a situation or a relationship where you are experiencing harm or trauma, that you should remain there for some higher purpose. I'm also not suggesting the trope of good things happen for a reason, or that God won't give you anything more than you can handle. I believe that's rubbish, and it's been misused and ultimately caused more pain and heartache. We're not called to stay in situations that are harmful to us. And as a professional Christian, I sincerely apologize if that has ever been your situation. Now, I'm obviously a pastor, not a mental health professional, and I, along with all of our staff at Crosspoint, we are advocates for mental health. We're also advocates of not going it alone. Part of our budget actually goes toward helping provide that for others, by way of groups or mentors or staff trainings, or helping those who may not have the means to pay for a counselor or a therapist that works for them. So mental health care, like physical health care, looks a little different for everyone. So if you're in need of someone to walk with you as you grow and work toward healthy mental health, and if you're not really sure how to access that, please let us know. And I would also say that if you find yourself with negative thoughts that are too much to navigate, there is always a 24-hour mental health line you can call, 988. You can call it at any time and you'll find someone to talk to. So, as individuals, it's near impossible to get through life without a painful experience, and this is also true for communities. There are hard histories we have both created and inherited. And I think this is one of the most important things we can do as a community, like Jacob's altar, is to honestly pass on our past so that those who come after us understand better what has made us who we are and will be less likely to repeat it. And there's a tendency to want to water down the past, especially our corporate past, to make it more palatable, or to believe that not acknowledging the past is best. And Brené Brown, the queen of owning hard things, says this: sometimes we're afraid to name experiences of feelings because we think that naming them gives them power. If we're feeling something hard, the last thing we want to do is give them power. But when we name and own hard things, it doesn't give them power. It gives us power. And the best definition I can think exists in the world is from Martin Luther King Jr. Power is the ability to affect change and achieve purpose. So if we put all of this together, if we name it and own hard things, it doesn't give the hard things power. It gives us the power to affect change and achieve purpose. So you are likely aware that there has been a trend in our country and in our state trying to water down and even wipe away some of our communal hard histories. And I'm talking, of course, about the history of slavery, of racism, of racist practices and policies in our communities, in our state, in our nation, in our churches. But we cannot fall victim to believing that not telling a truth about our past so that we can avoid being uncomfortable or uncomfortable feelings is a pathway to a better future. These things from the past, racist and discriminatory policies and practices and beliefs, have helped shape who we are today. And they will continue to form who we are going forward unless we choose to be mindful of them. Pointedly forgetting is not choosing to be mindful of the generational and current pain of those around us. The writer in Genesis told us very clearly what type of guy Jacob was. They could have easily just reframed him as somebody who was known not for his trickery, but for how entertaining he was at dinner parties. We would have never known. And this sermon would have been very different. Do hard histories make us look and feel bad? Yes. Do they sometimes make us feel guilty? Yes. Did I have any personal hand in any of those things? Not directly, no. But as Brené Brown suggests, owning these hard things gives us the power to change the future. Legislating the reframing of history so that we and our children will not be made uncomfortable will simply leave us with amnesia and no context of who we are and how we got here, or why the ongoing, unrecognized pain and trauma of our fellow citizens so oftentimes turns into eruptions. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention here an anniversary we should remember today. Would it surprise you to know that one of the deadliest and costliest riots in our country's history, considered a race riot, happened on this date, July 23rd, 1967. It didn't start in the Deep South. It started in Detroit, Michigan. And riots spread to more than 150 cities across the country, including one of the worst, which is in Newark, New Jersey. The collective riots would eventually be termed the Long Hot Summer. What sparked it? Well, the spark was a police raid in Detroit on an unsanctioned Black-owned bar. And in the early hours of the morning, there was a community celebrating the return of 2 Black servicemen from the Vietnam War. Police arrested all 82 people there, and witnesses started the protest that spread throughout the city, and then eventually across the country. In Detroit, the governor at that time sent in 5,000 National Guard troops, 800 Michigan State Police. President Lyndon Johnson sent nearly 5,000 paratroopers into the streets. There were tanks. And by the end of the violence, some 7,200 people had been arrested, 1,200 people injured, and 43 people had lost their lives. 33 were Black Detroit residents. Now, we're not naive to believe that this horrible event was simply caused by arrests at an illegal drinking establishment. There was something underlying there. Just like we wouldn't be naive enough to believe that 56 years later, the Black Lives Matter protests were sparked by arrest and death of one Black man. The tinder for the literal fire that was the long, hot summer was the history of frustrations, of poverty and unemployment and mistreatment of Black Americans caused by the systematic denial of employment and city services by mostly white-owned businesses and municipal governments, as well as the continual mistreatment of Black Americans by a mostly white police force. Many of you may also remember 1967 summer for some other reason, because it's also commonly been referred to as the Summer of Love. Two very different takes on that summer. If we refuse to remember, if we blot out the why, history shows us that we will continue to repeat ourselves. If we don't consciously remember, we will forget. And how will our children learn who we are and where they're from and why things are the way they are today? Who will walk beside them as they enter adulthood and have to navigate difficulties they encounter in their own lives? Shelter is not education. Just because history is hard, and just because some of our history recounts humanity's capacity to commit atrocities, does not mean that these behaviors are predisposed or that they're etched into human character. Because as followers of Jesus, we don't believe that to be true at all. We believe that God created humanity and then proclaimed it good. But that doesn't mean we aren't capable of doing horrible things. Our sacred scripture is full of individuals who did really horrible things, Jacob being one of them, and they're not censored. We should never stop being uncomfortable about the atrocities that humans inflict on one another. Because the second we do that, the second we whitewash it and decide that our comfort is more important than reality, that is when the cycle will start all over again. And what we thought we could never repeat becomes a part of our current story. And of course, I'm all for age appropriateness and all that and whatever that means. Many, if not most of the markers in our lives are not so easily categorized as good or bad, positive or difficult. Some stuff like that horrible treatment or surgery that led to remission, or that bad experience that ended up being where we met our best friend or our life partner. Stretch marks. All of these things make up who we are. Remembering, being mindful of, individually and corporately, our history, the things that we have done, the things that our ancestors have done, and that we have lived through, have made us who we are. And they also help us determine who we want to be. Remembering helps us know that we are not simply people of categories. And although these things helped create who we are corporately and individually, we don't have to let our present or our future be defined by the difficulties of the past. And as people of faith who try to follow the teachings of Jesus, we're actually commanded to remember. Deliberate forgetting is contrary to one of the very last things Jesus charged his disciples with, to remember. He instructed them, and by extension us, to remember each time they gathered at the table with the bread and the wine, what we now recognize as communion or Eucharist. We are to be a remembering people. Jesus' followers have practiced that ever since that Last Supper. And likewise, the communion, Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, it's not only an act of remembrance, it is in itself an act of protest. Each time we receive it, we're saying that we will not forget, that our lives, like the life of Christ, are not only about us. It invites us into a deeper story, to be a part of an alternative to what currently is. And like Jacob, sometimes it helps us realign our gaze. And while there are certainly times when we need self-care and rest, there are other times that we like Jacob, need reminding that we're not the centers of our own universe, and that as important as our personal and narrow interests are, they are not always the central point. The work of Christ is, at the same time, in us. It is next to us. It is all around us. There can be beauty, too, in the midst of the pain that remembering sometimes brings. It can serve as a reminder of how far we've come, that what we once were, we no longer have to be, that there is always hope for change. But if we don't take time to mark those things, corporately and individually, we're going to end up right back where we started. So, let us be a people that do not make fear of the past keep us from recognizing how it has made us who we are. We're a people of remembrance. Let us be a people who are mindful of. May that raise up pride in us. May that bring us to tears. May that give us reason to grieve and to celebrate. May that point us toward action and innovation and curiosity and closer to the way of Christ. Thanks, Crosspoint.
If you would like to know more or get connected to Crosspoint, go to crosspoint.org. If you're in need of care or assistance, go to crosspoint.org/care. And welcome home.